Right then, it's past, so we will get started. And good afternoon to everybody here, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. By way of introduction, my name's Hannah. I'm head of training here at Present Pal. And just to take you through a few bits of housekeeping, really, points to raise before we get started. We do have closed captioning available on today's webinar, which can be accessed via the Zoom toolbar. And just to avoid any sound interference, we have asked that all mics are muted and cameras are switched off for the duration of the webinar, if that's okay. And this will be an interactive session today. So we've got my colleague, Cara Hunt, who's our Chief Marketing Officer, managing the chat. So please do feel free to make yourself known. Say a quick hello and where you're from in the chat function now to get used to that. Cara will also be able to answer any questions throughout the session today. So take advantage of that and type any questions that you have into the chat box and she'll be able to respond there. We will also leave some time at the end of the session for some questions. So if they're not sort of answered throughout, we will try and raise them at the end during that Q&A session. And we will also be raising or using a couple of polls as well. So using the poll feature. If for whatever reason you're unable to interact with the poll feature, please could you just provide your answers in the chat function and we'll be able to pick them up that way instead. So here's our agenda for today. We've got a really great session planned for you all today, and we'll look into some pivotal questions along with communication challenges and strategies for students presenting both in person and remotely. We'll also be providing a first glance at our all new Present Pal V3 app, and some of you will be the first to see this and also receive an early access license of your own following attendance for today. So just to run through some introductions before we get stuck in. Again, my name is Hannah Woodruff. I'm head of training here at Present Pal, and I'll be your host for today. We also have two main speakers joining us, and that's Adam Tweed, who's Service Development Manager at AbilityNet, and our very own Ben Scott, who is Customer Research Coordinator here at Present Pal. So Adam has been working closely with higher education institutions to develop AbilityNet services to support universities and colleges, such as My Study, My Way platform, and the ever popular Tech Demo Days, which is now online. As a former manager of AbilityNet's DSA Centre in Brighton, Adam has also carried out DSA and workplace assessments, and with degrees in both film studies and psychology and a career in IT in both the commercial and education sectors, Adam is a self-described jack of all trades. He's a lover of all things tech and passionate about the idea of technology as an experience, a seamless enhancement to the way of working that invites users to explore and contributes. And he believes if you can break it, it's been designed badly, and that's the best tech, and that the best tech is the stuff that you don't need to think about. Quite right. And our second speaker, Ben Scott, is Present Pal's Customer Research Coordinator, a graduate of psychology from the University of St Andrews, and Ben has previously conducted research on how to make mindfulness exercises accessible for all. Ben is currently researching the challenges learners face with remote presentation-based activities and assessments, and how these findings can inform and be applied to UDL practices. So two brilliant speakers, and really looking forward to hearing more from them in a moment. So with the introductions out of the way, we'll move on to our main discussion piece, and I'll invite both speakers to join me now. So hello to you both, Ben and Adam. Hi. Guys, and the first topic that I thought I wanted to focus on today really is, as the title sort of led us all to believe, is what we have achieved in the past 12 months since moving to a remote world really. And for our audience members, it'd be great to have your input as well. So please feel free to use the chat to share some of your successes, and we'll be able to use that as part of our discussion, I'm sure, as well. So I'll pass over to the two of you. Perhaps I'll start with you, Ben.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I think definitely off the bat, it's sort of easy to sort of reflect on maybe what we maybe didn't do or what we could have achieved better. But I think it's actually much more positive and beneficial to look at what we did really well. And there are some great things that came out of 2020, and a few of them Hannah's got flashed up on screen. I think probably the most obvious one, at least for me, is just sort of being able to adapt to new technologies. When the pandemic first hit last March, I was still a student, and it was everyone's sort of attitude of, oh, well, we can't adapt to online teaching, and we're not going to be able to do this online, we're not going to be able to do your assessments online. Whereas now, almost 12 months down the line, I think that's completely flipped. And we've been able to say, no, we can make this work on Zoom or Teams or whatever platform. We can do assessments remotely as well. And I think just seeing that attitude change is really quite encouraging, and definitely a big success from 2020. Adam, have you had a sort of similar experience in terms of tech?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it was I kind of jotted down that, you know, when life gives us lemons and you make lemonade, well, some people have kind of taken that a step further. They've made lemon soufflés and, you know, lemon pie and everything. They've got really, really creative, and that's been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been present in webinars and kind of online events where people have been using. So, for example, I was on a group discussion the other day where somebody was presenting on a slide and it flipped to the next slide, and they'd actually used the boxes in Google Slides as post-it notes. So rather than having an in-person kind of collaboration, somebody had gone, well, no, we could just use this, and everybody was just typing in those individual kind of post-it notes. It was brilliant. Access to events as well have been fantastic. These are now international. I took a punt fairly recently on joining the Berlin meetup, and it was fantastic. It was so welcoming and just a brilliant atmosphere. And that was something I couldn't even consider. I wouldn't even have considered, 12 months ago. And it also leads to a greater diversity in the audience of people that we're reaching. And that's so crucial, being able to involve so many people. And it's going to be challenging. The job market's going to be challenging going forward. But I think the thing with working from home now means that the businesses are no longer going to be able to say, well, we can't accommodate that. So for disabled students, certainly that's potentially, although there is still a massive discrepancy, obviously, moving into the job market, but that's one less barrier that they're going to be confronted with is that kind of stone wall of saying, no, we can't have people working from home. Nobody can use that as an excuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that has really come out of this year is exactly what you're saying, Adam, is that people are really realizing that maybe working from home or studying from home is really working for them. And going back to fully in person maybe isn't their preferred choice anymore. They want to continue working from home. They want to continue studying from home. And I think absolutely we should continue to support that and celebrate that. I know I definitely am probably more inclined to go back in person, but I just like that sort of social interaction. But it's absolutely, I know many students who I'm still in touch with are fully preferring working to their own schedule and sort of learning in a very different sort of format. There's some great things coming up in the chat as well. So talking about what you were mentioning as well, as I'm like finding creative new solutions and sort of connecting with people through these new ways that may have not been able to have been reached before. And I think that's another great success of 2020 is just access more generally. People are able to access events in all new ways, like even through things like DSA assessments. People may have been unable to travel in person to get their assessment before and can now do so online, even for people who maybe lived quite far away from their university or college. No longer have any like travel expenses. Obviously, there's lots of other factors to put in there as well. I'm not downplaying those at all, but it's definitely, as you were saying, Adam, one less barrier to people's success in academic.
I have to say, DSA assessments, I've had them with students in dressing gowns, and that's been quite an experience. So
I can imagine. I'm sure I've been very, very tempted to do the same. I should have worn one today, actually.
No, absolutely. There's some really interesting points there, and as you said, there's a few people that have mentioned similar sorts of things throughout the chat. One that's standing out there is Tony Smith thinking outside the box to enhance student engagement, which is on the back of what we were saying there as well. Keeping students engaged and the ability to do that now with all of the enhancements as part of that. Okay, brilliant. Some really interesting stuff there. And that sort of moves us on, I guess, quite nicely to our next point, which is around the differences really between presenting remotely compared to in person. So I do actually have a poll that I'm going to raise for the audience members because I think it'd be quite interesting to see some of your responses. So hopefully you can see the poll on screen now. And the question is, do you prefer in-person or remote presentations? So if you could answer that accordingly, and then I'll share everyone's results. I'll just give it a moment. Brilliant, we've got someone in the chat as well, remote. Someone has said, yeah, both, yes. Which is, really interesting point that I'm sure we'll discuss more about in a moment. So I'll end that poll in a moment. Looks like people are still voting. There we go, and I will share these results. So we have got a bit of both, as you can see. We've got 59% of the responders that preferred in-person presentations, and then not close behind 41% who prefer remote. And then, as somebody quite rightly pointed out, there probably is a lot of people that prefer both for different reasons. So what are your thoughts on that then, guys? Well,
I mean, I thought I'd love it. It is the dream of the introvert. So, you know, you're not having to look out on a kind of sea of faces and kind of every single micro movement that anybody makes, you kind of break down in your head to an absolute disaster for the way that you're presenting. But it's kind of careful what you wish for. Because I found that lack of engagement is really difficult sometimes. The lack of feedback, the complete lack of feedback, certainly on some of the larger webinars, for example, where you've got no cameras, no microphone, and you'll say something, and it would be something that would normally get, you know, maybe a rumble of something from an audience, but there's nothing, and you find yourself thinking, am I still on? Is this still working, kind of thing? Can somebody just tell me whether? So that's really, really strange. And then there are other environments. I guess I did something recently with a smaller group, and somebody's cat appeared on the screen, and it is incredibly difficult to kind of keep your focus on trying to present and trying to keep a straight face when all you've got kind of looking back at you is this rather large cat. And I guess things like the attendee numbers has always been something as well. So there's this kind of strange situation where you think, so you're presenting and you can see, if you've got the presenter mode on, how many attendees there are, and that number keeps kind of clocking up and up and up. And in my head, I start translating that into like a room. How many people would I be looking at if this was a room? You know, at what point do I start thinking, well, I could be filling a hall with this sort of thing, you know? And that can be incredibly frustrating. So frustrating, that would be, worrying sometimes. But
yeah. I totally agree, Adam, and there's some great stuff popping in the chat as well. Like, and I 100% agree with you all. It's just like, while remote has all of its benefits, nothing really compares to that sort of immediate social interaction that you get from an in-person presentation. And is what's listed on the slide here, kind of a Zoom fatigue. Like, you're really having, there's some great research on it as well. If anyone is interested, I would highly recommend doing a quick Google. But like, the amount of like tiny little things that you'll notice on people's faces in an in-person audience is just, it can't be replicated in that remote world. And sort of you're having to sort of work a bit harder unconsciously to pick up on those in this virtual environment. And if you're doing that day in, day out, it's really quite exhausting, probably more so than in an in-person presentation, where even though it can be quite nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing, having all those people in the same room looking right at you and listening to you, but you can't get that sort of immediate sort of feedback that you get in that environment, in that remote setting. I think as well, Adam, what you were mentioning previously about collaboration, like I found for like group presentations remotely particularly challenging, and I find that it's much easier in that sort of in-person setting, especially if you had like a group meeting together and you've got this energy going and you're just bouncing ideas off each other in real time. And you have to get quite creative to sort of replicate that in the sort of remote world, like what you were mentioning, sort of having a collaborative Google Doc. But even then, you have to sort of rely that everyone's working on it at the same time, and people have the same internet connection and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting that there was pretty much a 50-50 split down the middle there from the guys on the poll. But yeah, definitely lots to think about.
I think the Zoom fatigue is a really interesting one. Microsoft have actually developed I think in the calendar app, you can now set a time that your meetings kind of end a little bit prematurely. So I think you can set it for like half an hour. It'll kind of flash up 5 minutes to go, and that you can build in those buffers between meetings if everybody adheres to them, which is that's a cultural thing we're going to have to get used to in this kind of blended environment moving forward if it does continue. So yeah, really interesting times.
Absolutely. Somebody said similar in the chat just then as well, in terms of sort of the amount of sessions, particularly online. I think a lot of people I speak to as well, I tend to have jumped straight from one Zoom meeting straight into the other. And then a lot of people sort of feedback, it's very difficult to remember what you've said to one person if you are jumping back to back from meetings. So that Zoom fatigue is definitely something that I'm sure we've all experienced over the last 12 months. The next thing that we've sort of included as part of this was to sort of on the back of that, following on from those points, is the challenges. So why are presentations difficult? And what do individuals sort of face as part of this? So Ben, I don't know whether you want to share some of your insight around these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Hannah. As Hannah mentioned at the start, I have a psychology background, and so does Adam, which is great. So part of my research I'm doing at the moment is sort of really understanding what the challenges are for people presenting, because I think we can all recognize that even in this remote world, presentations are still happening, and they're probably happening maybe even more so than they would in person. Suddenly all your Zoom meetings are basically presentations now. They're not the same as what used to be, which is completely fine. But there are lots of different reasons why presentations can be challenging, not only for everyone, but particularly for people who may have additional challenges or disabilities as well. So it's things like people that may have executive functioning challenges, being able to keep on time and keep track. It can be quite challenging, particularly if you do have a disability that impairs your executive functioning, and things like ADHD, for example. I think cognitive overload is quite an interesting one. It's something I'm always really interested in when you are presenting, maybe more so in the in-person setting. You maybe stood up in front of a group of people, for example, with your PowerPoint on the projector behind you. Maybe that's loaded up on a computer that's not your own, if you're a student, for example. And you might have a script in one hand and a clicker in another hand, and there's lots and lots going on. And giving a presentation itself is quite a complicated psychological process. There's lots and lots going on. So if you're worrying about all these extra other things, it suddenly makes everything that bit more challenging. So things like your information recall can be inhibited as a result of that. Well, another really interesting one is looking at sort of like working memory challenges. So say, for example, you're a student with an assessed presentation, but you also have dyslexia. Dyslexia is a learning difference that can create some working memory challenges anyway. But if you are having to present and you do have dyslexia, it can be pretty challenging in terms of understanding your content and remembering your content, knowing what you just said, what's coming next. But as we all know, maybe even in remote sessions, you might get asked a question quickly in the chat and you obviously want to answer that straight away, but then it can be challenging to sort of get back on track and remember what you were just saying and sort of, okay, I'm here, this is what I'm going to say next. linear thinking as well, I think, in particular for students that are on the autistic spectrum, can be particularly challenging. Obviously, not to overgeneralize, we all understand that every single person is different and no two people will experience the same things. But for some people with ASD, it can be challenging to sort of stick to one linear path. And if that does veer from what is planned, it can be distressing and anxiety inducing. So it's really important to consider that when people are presenting, that these challenges do arise, and there's lots and lots of different things that can go on that can affect everyone, really, not just people with disabilities. Yeah, sorry, I just sort of rambled on a little bit there. Adam, you might have some real world experience as well with this.
I've got real world experiences of experiencing all of those barriers. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of public speaking. I'm not a huge fan of presenting. But yeah, I can certainly sympathize with many of those kind of experiences. Of certainly with me, it's things like the anxiety reaches a level at which I forget everything, literally everything, and from words and terms to next points and that sort of thing. And it's one of these horrible situations where the anxiety builds on itself. So you're not in a position, unless you're lucky enough to be able to have a strategy in place to break that anxiety kind of spiral, it's only going to get worse and worse. And that leads to many students, I know, kind of avoiding presentations, even if that is potentially quite damaging in terms of grades. It's one of these kind of, it gets to the point where that sacrifice is worth taking just because of the anxiety. And that's such a shame. So, yeah.
On that point, which is really interesting in terms of sort of the well-being side of things, do you think that over the past sort of 12 months, obviously the beginning of COVID and sort of moving to a remote world, people may have had one opinion on whether they preferred in-person or remote, and that opinion may have changed now if they're looking at sort of what they feel that they prefer, considering all the experiences over sort of the 12-month. How do you both feel that could impact sort of a student's well-being from the point of view of they may sort of feel very sort of lonely now, perhaps very isolated if they've not been able to see anybody, perhaps they're in a vulnerable and had to sort of stay indoors and not be able to sort of interact elsewhere, so perhaps they may be in a state of sort of wanting that more. What are your thoughts on sort of the well-being side of things?
I think it's, again, as we've said, the 50-50 split, and the person in the chat who said there should be an option for both. That's the kind of the key thing, that there are many kind of, I'm far less anxious personally presenting to my laptop. But again, I miss that camaraderie. I miss, as a student, I used to get nervous with everybody else. It was one of those, it was a shared experience, and it's that mutual support that you're going to lack in the remote world. So it's almost the choice will be the greatest thing going forward. I think that's possibly where people have started to kind of reimagine their kind of the structure of their courses, to say, is this an essential element? Yeah. Can it be an optional? Can it be a choice to deliver online or in person? So the blended learning is potentially going to be, that's going to kind of open up that. I think it's going to be an interesting thing.
Yeah. No, definitely. Well, I guess one thing that we've we've said a couple of times now, these challenges very much are sort of universal. So this is something that not just students with disabilities are sort of facing. These are challenges that are very much universal, and I'm sure we've all experienced at some point, which is something that sort of leads us on to the next point. And very interested to see sort of the audience's point of view. I'm going to raise a poll again. A very simple question: have you ever experienced presentation anxiety? Yes or no? And that is really just to sort of gauge, is this universal? Is it something that we've all experienced at some point? So I'll let that run for a moment. That'll be interesting to see the responses here. Okay, So we will share. So it's not surprising to see that 95% of the responders have experienced presentation anxiety at some point. So that does again prove or highlight that this is really a universal problem that I'm sure everyone at some point, one time or another, has experienced anxiety when in that presentation scenario, perhaps even just sort of public speaking or delivering some form of speech to perhaps a smaller group of people even. And one thing that I thought was quite interesting to be able to share with you guys is actually one of our user stories. So I'm going to play a video for you in a moment. I'll just get that up. And this is from somebody that has experienced that exact thing and the use of Present Pal and how that's benefited them.
Hi, I'm Erin, I'm 22 and I'm studying criminology and sociology at the University of Stirling. My main challenges with presentations is definitely managing my anxiety leading up to it and during the presentation as well. I get very nervous and anxious talking in front of large groups, which was a requirement for my particular course. So having lots of people having all eyes on you watching it, and then on top of it all, it being assessed did definitely cause a lot of anxiety, which was difficult to manage. So compared to previous presentations that I did without the help of Present Pal, I really noticed quite a big difference in my self-confidence and my self-belief in my ability to actually perform presentations. I used to get very, very, very nervous leading up to any kind of presentation I was doing in a seminar. So it was really nice to just have that extra bit of reassurance and knowledge that we're able to practice everything using the app as well.
Brilliant. So yeah, no, really great story and sort of example from Erin there in terms of the anxiety that they experienced, and then using a tool like Present Pal to support them through that process, both from preparation point of view, but of course delivery as well, and sort of managing those challenges. So as you can see on screen, this is a great opportunity to discuss some of the other strategies that are out there for students, to support students in coping with these challenges. And please do feel free for audience members to pop some suggestions into the chat as well, and perhaps we can use that as part of this discussion. But I'll hand over to you, Adam, perhaps first.
Okay. I would say I've gone kind of oddly away from tech, and my kind of top tips are, and I would also say I'm a massive hypocrite with all the kind of advice that I'm giving that I never actually follow it myself. But the kind of top tips that I've used with students back when I was assessing is things like, you're not Steve Jobs or Michelle or Barack Obama. What you say isn't going to become part of world history, so try not to put that level of pressure on yourself. Your nerves are significant to you, but to other people, they're inconsequential. So people don't tend to remember how nervous you are, even minutes after the presentation. I'd also say that bear in mind, as I said previously, that the audience is often your classmates. So it's going to be people who are either worried about presenting or having just presented and are going to be in exactly the same boat as you. Practically, I think things like take a breath. It's usually quite useful before you start presenting to take a deep breath to just kind of relax yourself. Obviously, it's it is a technique. But I'd also say try and keep something that you can fidget with to hand to give you that break. So if somebody fires a question, or if you lose your way, or if you forget what you're going to say, take a sip of water or take off your glasses and wipe the lens. I knew a guy who used to do that all the time. You could tell when he didn't really have the answer to hand, because he would just take off his glasses and wipe them, and it would give him that space to just kind of think something through. try not to read something out from a script. I am terrible at doing that. I get very nervous, so obviously I forget all my points, so I do prefer that kind of reassurance that I've got everything written down verbatim in front of me, but I do realize that gives me quite a flat presenting style, so I will try and learn that. And it'd be really handy if there was an app that could break it down into simple bullet points that you could go through. So there are, I believe, some really good apps out there, but maybe coming to that.
Yeah, Adam, I would agree with lots of stuff you said, but in particular, like the breathing stuff. Previously, I've done research on mindfulness activities and breathing, and it probably has a lot more merit now after all the COVID stuff I did this last January to March. But we found that just one simple 5-minute breathing exercise, whether you've done it before or not, it will immediately boost your mood and how you view yourself in the situation. So if you're able to apply that in something that maybe creates a bit of anxiety for you, like a presentation or public speaking, to just do something like a box breathing exercise, which is just like breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds. You can just sort of take that moment to yourself to sort of, as you're saying, sort of realize that the world's not going to stop spinning, like everything's just going to be okay after this. Like you're having this moment. I liked what someone put in the chat as well, just sort of listening to music that you like to right before to get yourself pumped up. I was doing it before this webinar. I actually had my Taylor Swift on. It was a great time, but that was embarrassing. You all know a little bit too much about me now, but no, I think exactly that, just sort of encouraging students and yourself to sort of find what works for them and sort of get them in that sort of zone, and like encouraging choice. We have up here on the screen as well, just sort of encouraging things like a group rehearsal or like feedback sessions. I think in this remote world, I think that's an amazing thing to do, and sort of encourage people to communicate just in general, like to sort of realize, as Hannah, you were mentioning, like it can be a bit isolating at the moment for some students. So sort of highlighting places where people can go, or like create their own virtual groups where they could rehearse or have a wee feedback session with their peers is absolutely vital in this way. And of course, we all know there's some great AT out there as well that can potentially support with these challenges as well.
Absolutely. No, some really great stuff there. And I think, yeah, one of my favorites there, I think you mentioned it as well, Ben. Someone said that they've got a Pump Myself Up playlist on loop before, which is brilliant and something that I'm sure a lot of people would benefit from as well. So before we move on to the sneak peek at our new app, we'll leave some time now for some questions if anybody has any. So feel free to pop them into the chat. You can send them directly to us if you don't want it to sort of be a public question, and we'll ask away. Or they may have all been answered, we'll see.
I do just kind of on the managing the anxiety and presentation, I also go for runs as well if I can, if there's space beforehand, just to kind of, and that's about stressing my body in an appropriate way that means that anxiety's got an appropriate avenue, I guess, and that's gonna, relax is a not exactly the word I'd look for, but you do run the risk of pitching in for a webinar dripping with sweat, which isn't always a good look. So.
No, that's no, but great point. I mean, a lot of people use sort of exercise and runs and things like that to sort of calm them and support with anxiety, that sort of thing. So yeah, another great suggestion. So I'm not sure whether we've got any. I think there were just sort of more comments. We've got one on the add-in side of things for the app, it looks like, so I'll perhaps answer that in a moment or two when I go through the app. For anybody that does perhaps have any questions that suddenly pop into their heads, you can of course get in touch with us after today's session. You can drop us an email with any questions or get in touch for a sort of further discussion that way as well. So just because I'm conscious of timing, we'll move on to the sneak peek for you all, which is very exciting news. And as we mentioned on the invite and also at the beginning of this webinar, this is a great opportunity for you guys to actually get set up yourselves. So as a thank you for attending, we will be setting you all up with early access to the brand new V3 app. Some dates to consider. So the app is due to be officially launched on the 22nd of March, but we are releasing that to students. So new students as well as existing students will be able to move over to the new app as of the 8th of March. So that gives a little bit of a grace period for them to log on, save all their files and move across to the new app. And then as of the 22nd of March, everybody will be using the V3 app. So you're probably asking why we've got a new app. And the reason for that is that we've enhanced our current app to improve the overall user experience with a focus on accessibility and also ensuring that it's accessible for screen readers as well. So I'm going to take you through sort of a very quick sneak peek of what the app looks like, but please do get in touch. We'll arrange a one-to-one session to run through a more in-depth training and answer any questions that you may have from there. And perhaps by that time, you'll have had a bit of time to play around with the app yourselves and we can discuss some questions. So what's new? Well, there's some things that I've included here, some new additions, just to make you aware of. Accessibility, as I mentioned, has really been the focus for us, and we've improved the accessibility features available for all users within the app as well. So create notes your way. This is because the new app allows users to use the app in portrait mode as well as landscape, which is brilliant. From an accessibility point of view, it's screen reader friendly. It adopts iOS and Android accessibility features. We also have new colour overlays and fonts that are really more appropriate for our user base, and we do adhere to WCAG AAA standards throughout the app as well. In terms of the rehearsal side of things, you've always been able to listen back to your audio, but we've really enhanced this feature even more to allow students to add feedback, but also edit their notes throughout that process. And the track your improvements, I'll go into a bit more detail in a moment, but that really is enabling students to view their progress and their achievements, so their sort of improvements over a period of time. You will hopefully notice it yourselves, but the overall feel of the app, there's improved flow. So in terms of user experience, you'll see that that is brilliant in this new app. So hopefully you'll see that for yourselves in the next couple of days when you get access. So from the point of view of accessibility and visual settings, again, just to note, here are some of the new additions that are included as part of this. It's always been important for us to allow users to personalise the app to suit their needs, and this is consistent in the new app too. Within the visual settings, you can amend the font size and the colour overlay throughout the app and choose whatever offers the least visual stress to you. You'll also notice that there's a more clear contrast between the tiles and the different areas throughout the app to improve that overall experience and just make it clearer for users. Dark mode is another addition to V3, which inverts the background colours to reduce eye strain. And that's another optional feature that's now available. There's an example of that on the right-hand side. And finally, we've also added an option to turn on accessible scrolling, which will add a button to the top and the bottom of the screen instead of having to rely on that swiping motion when you're moving through your bullets. As well, as I mentioned, Rehearsal has improved significantly, and this has always been there to support users in building confidence as well as improving the working memory, of course. So this is something that we've focused on in a new app, but really enhanced the existing rehearsal mode that we have in our current app. So the idea here is that you can rehearse now with or without your slideshow, and all of the audio is captured as it was before. But the great thing now about the V3 app is that students can review the recording with the flashcard visible as shown on screen there, and then self-assess. So they can now use the inbuilt grading function that you'll see popping up on screen. It's sort of on repeat, that animation. And this allows students to sort of track and grade their content accordingly so that they can then focus on amending that content from there. As well as this, on the right-hand side, you'll notice we've got sort of a progress and a tracking area. So you can click into different elements. So you can look at perhaps just your timing, and you can look at the progress that you've made over a period of time and over different rehearsals. So again, this will really support in building confidence for our users, but also really motivate them to continue with these best practices moving forward if they can see that sort of that progress themselves. So as I mentioned, this is not by any means an in-depth training, so please do book in a time to review that. We can do that one-to-one over Zoom. We can do a full training and answer any questions that you have from there. Just to note, because I am setting you all up with early access, you'll have to download the app that's titled Present Pal Pilot from the App Store. So that's the first thing to keep aware of. The second is, because again, you are having early access to this app, you will need to ensure that you press the sign up button in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen when you first access that app. And you'll then be able to follow the process and set up a password and create your account from there. You'll be pleased to know that this process will be a lot more streamlined for students, so we'll have smartened that up by the 8th so that students can simply, if they're an existing user, pop in their email address, their existing access code, and then set up their account from that point forward. So that's pretty much everything for us today. I think we're more or less good for timing, which is impressive. As I mentioned, please do feel free to get in touch. Do book a time in. I think Cara's going to pop my link into the chat, so you can actually book a convenient time to catch up straight into my calendar whenever's good for you guys. We also have the official launch date on the 22nd of March, but that 8th of March is the date to be aware of in terms of students moving across. We will be continuing with this webinar series, so it's been great to see so many of you on today and joining us. I hope you found the session very informative. I know I did. Thank you so much to our two speakers, Adam and Ben. And if anybody who's on this webinar is interested in any particular topics for future webinars, or in fact to be a speaker and support us with any of the content that's interesting for them, then get in touch and we'd love to have a chat further with you about that. So yeah, that's everything from me. I don't know if there's anything sort of leaving comments from you two, Adam and Ben.
No, just thank you very much for everyone listening to us. I know I certainly enjoyed putting all this content together and sort of reflecting on the past year and what we've been doing well, and what we can learn and make changes to for this year coming. It's been great. Thank you for listening to me ramble on for a little bit.
Yep, same from me. Thank you everyone for turning up, and thank you for inviting me along. And yeah, and thank you for putting it together in a way that works for somebody who doesn't really like presenting. So it's really nice to just come along to one of these and chat.
No, it's been great to have you. I found it a brilliant session. I hope everybody enjoyed it too. And our contact details are in the chat. So thanks again. And I hope you all have a wonderful end to your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.